Welcome to Plus One Forward, the podcast powered by the Apocalypse, where we talk about tabletop role-playing games using or inspired by the Apocalypse engine. I'm your MC, Rach, and I'm joined today by my co-MC, Rich. Hey, Rich, how are you doing today?
I am fantastic. Hey, it's good to be on again with you, Rach.
Yeah, it's been a little while, and we're excited today because we are going to reach out once again to players of Powered by the Apocalypse games and answer their questions. Talk about how you get the most out of your games, maybe look at some concerns various players have, get into the fine nitty-gritty of the community and see what people are talking about and what really interests them. So we got a couple questions to cover today. Rich, you want to start with the first question?
So first of all, Rach, thank you for asking the question, polling the folks on the Google Plus community for the Gauntlet. And one of the ones we picked out is from James Mullen. If the moves I've picked from a playbook turn out to be suboptimal for where the story is going, what should I do? Stick with them? Ask the MC if I can select new moves, or ask the MC to shift the story so that I can use the moves that I've picked?
So my position on this is going to vary depending on, well, the type of moves that are picked and causing you issues and how deep that game is, either in the session or in a campaign, and how many times you've used that move. There's some variances we could play around with. Swapping a move deep in a campaign feels a little bit cheesy, in my opinion. But that's in the context where you've had a move, you've used it a couple of times, and you feel like it's not relevant to the game anymore. At that point, you might as well start looking at leveling up into moves that are a little bit more relevant, and then just keeping that in your character's history. Maybe it'll come back again. Maybe it'll be an opportunity for a great throwback. But not every move on your sheet needs to be active, as it were. It's okay if the spotlight shifts a bit. However, if you picked a move and you haven't really used it, you haven't really gotten it into play, and you've noticed that it's something that is not clicking at the table, that's something that the game and the story is definitely not going to support, something that seemed cool, and then you saw how it would work in action, and you realize, oh, this isn't quite right. This isn't what I wanted. I, as a player, would just make a mention to the MC, hey, I'm swapping out this move for this other one because this just isn't working. This, it's not really anyone's fault, but this move slot could be better spent elsewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, good call.
An example I would like to cite, and I'm going to call it an old shame. When I was brought in as a role player, I was brought in with a bunch of trad players, and they took the position of, if you put points in something and you haven't really used it, it's not really coming out, just erase it and move those points to something more relevant. Just don't bother telling anyone. Nobody's going to ask. There are no RPG police who are going to show up and be like, hey, you shouldn't have stats in that. When I was playing in a Apocalypse World game, I was playing Quarantine, and I had one of the moves that required players to reach out to you to trigger it. And I don't remember the specifics. I think it was something like if they came to you for advice, you could give them XP.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, one of those moves that really requires your table to be all thinking on the same level. And it really wasn't the fault of the players. It was really more the fault of the characters. The characters were all hot-headed types who would never reach out to my super squishy Quarantine, who was really good at asking, what do I do in situations? They couldn't reciprocate. And at the end of the first session, it was clear to me that we were never going to use this move ever. And I just quietly erased it and then put it in another move instead. I think I took the move that lets you hold your punches, where you can decide how much damage you're doing. And that became substantially more effective and important to the game.
Especially for a group that fire first and ask questions later. I'm sure that probably was much more applicable to actually, no, I'm going to let this one live so we can talk to them.
Pretty much. I think I only used it once where there was a PC I had a bad relationship with, and it's sort of like right after the climax. I was like, I'm holding my punches, I swing my gun and just hit him with the butt of, or hit her, I think, with the butt of my gun and knock her out. It doesn't do any damage. It was the only time I used my rifle all game.
But let's keep in mind, worst comes to worst is what? 2 moves? I mean, come on. Like, most games, You're talking like 2 sessions, you're going to have another advancement, take those moves that you don't have access to, and you're good to go. Sometimes those moves maybe aren't applicable now, but if this is a longer term campaign, maybe it's a back pocket thing. And then all of a sudden they're like, wait, you had that move? Yeah. Oh, I've had it since Carrigan, baby. You got a couple moves, and you really got, like, if you're like, oh, I really wanted to trigger these moves, it doesn't feel like that's where we're headed. This game's a conversation. You're going to hear this as a through line in several of our answers. Don't be afraid to go, hey guys, by the way, I've got off to the right if you want a free XP, or hey GM, I've got a move here that I haven't felt like the trigger made sense. My faceless has oh yeah, where I get to run through walls or run through things that are in my way to get to places. Can you just keep that in mind? Because I think it would be super awesome if I could pull off that move. Don't be afraid to have that conversation before you switch out moves. It's the thing where you're like, I really, really want to see this in play. Say so.
Yeah, signpost.
Right? We're all smart folks.
Yeah, signpost, especially if one of those moves is a move that was defaulted on your character sheet, that the playbook indicates this is one of the things your character is supposed to be about, and it's not really getting addressed. I've even been a sloppy MC when I was running Monster Hearts. I had a Serpentine who had to pull me aside and be like, okay, we have to talk about how my move works because it's not quite clicking and I don't really think I'm being engaged the way I should be engaged. So how do we fix this? And we talked about it for 5 minutes, cleaned it up, and then made that a priority in terms of addressing that player. And everyone was happier.
Flip side of this, talking about the moves not affecting the story, kind of a weird angle into this. The first character that I ever played in a PbtA game, I played a Skinner. Now, I came from, and probably still am, if you talk to people who play with me, a very direct application of the moves. Like, I go hit things. I often play fighters, and I made a Skinner and didn't realize that Skinner's moves were about manipulating people and getting folks to do things for you. I thought, I'll go do the thing, and if I get in trouble, I'll manipulate folks to cover for me. And I really wasn't applying the moves correctly. That isn't exactly what James is talking about here, but there is one thing to keep in mind, is let's look at what the theme of the playbook is from the way that the moves are constructed to have you interact with the world. And sometimes that's can be a misunderstanding as a player. Other times it could be this playbook doesn't really fit in the story that we're telling, and do we want to adjust and course correct for that, or maybe we just want to choose new moves, or worst comes to worst, hey, maybe I shouldn't be playing a Skinner right now. Looks like you guys need another heavy hitter. How about I play a chopper?
I've suddenly leveled up into a completely different playbook.
Ba-boom. What is the next question that we've chosen to talk over today?
Our next question is from David LaFreniere. How should players best facilitate their characters interacting in a hostile way? As a follow-up, how can the MC help facilitate, or if the game situation/system feels appropriate, encourage players to have their characters engage in hostile ways? The great PvP discussion, as it were.
Yes. See also when Mark Diaz-Truman talks about it in the Urban Shadows episode, he talks a bit about PvP. But let's talk about it here, because I definitely want to hear your take on it, Rach.
Yeah, I jotted down some thoughts. I really think PvP gets the most interesting if player characters want things that other characters have. Consider how much your character would want to work with other characters and what their thresholds would be. At what point is it too much for you to work with these other characters and that relationship shatters? A lot of these games that do have a lot of these sort of hostile PvP mechanics play around with the idea that everything has a cost, nothing comes for free. So a final thing to keep in mind here is the stance that your character either would never work with anyone or want something other people have, or could never be convinced to participate in potentially hostile relationships with other characters. That's kind of a non-starter because it defeats the whole purpose of having these mechanics. It's
Right.
really interesting when you have PvP where we know what the relationship was between these characters either before or after. If they start as hostile and then shift into something that's not hostile just because of circumstances, what's the breaking point? What causes them to flush back out again?
Yeah. One of the things about the my character wouldn't work with this person ever again. Let's think of Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, hopefully everybody's watched that movie. If you haven't, you totally should. Guardians of the Galaxy. In that movie, there's a moment where Drax betrays the entire party to accomplish his goal of killing a dude who totally kicks his ass. Now, if the players all said, well, Drax is out, we would never work with him again, really cut off a lot of really interesting development for that character and for the group as a whole. So that there's definitely some benefits. And the mechanics really, for some of our games that we play in the PbtA world, are built for this kind of conflict. And so you're walking away from the game that you chose to play, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Exactly.
Like you said, Rach, the level of PvP varies by the game that you're playing. Monster Hearts, Cartel, Urban Shadows all thrive on player versus player. And then games like Dungeon World and Fellowship don't so much. Coming in just by saying, hey, we're going to play Cartel, that should give you a hint to the level of PvP. That said, a discussion at the start with the group is helpful so everybody knows what's expected. Because some people might just be there because it sounds cool or it looks like really awesome art, or narco fiction. Who doesn't want to play that?
Yeah, that's something I've encountered a lot with convention games in particular, is people hear the pitch and they come to the table and they don't realize there's that player versus player mechanic. And then either they struggle with it by shutting down all player versus player, so you get sort of the lone wolf effect where somebody's like, oh, I have my own people and I surround myself by my old people, and why would I reach outward? Or someone that tries to cause all chaos and has no room for negotiations. Both of these extremes do not work well.
No, they don't. They really shut down play, and they work against how this game's going to fire. All of a sudden, you've gone into either a freeform game or you're forcing yourself into a point where you are using moves that maybe actually will work against you, against an interesting story. You're walking away from mechanics that were built to drive the story forward. It's a lot of stuff that breaks up. And then guess what? All of a sudden you don't have a good time. Man, well, it wasn't really that fun. I went off in my corner and I tried to do some kingdom building. Well, dude, why did you do that? You're playing Monster Hearts. That is really dumb. So maybe you should lean into it.
Rich, what advice would you have for players who find themselves struggling a little bit with this player versus player interaction? They're concerned about the social faux pas they could commit here.
I get it. Coming from a more conventional style world, or you come from a group that they want to get along. They want to play games like Golden Sky Stories or Primetime Adventures where it's more of a comedy type thing. That's totally cool. Here's what you do. Check in with people. If you're worried about, oh, they're going to hate me, the player, because my character is terrible, check in. Hey guys, this looks like the point when my Skinner is going to have their little buddy come after your gunlucker because you shot her pet snake. Does that make sense? Like, that's cool, right? And the gunlucker sure as heck is going to say, what? I will, just so you know, he's got no chance. Doesn't mean I'm not going to try. All right, we're awesome. And it adds tension. You step away from the moment to moment for just a bit to check in with the players, check in with the MC. And if a player's like, oh wow, yeah, shooting your pet snake is a bad thing. Okay, well, I can see that. And maybe it's a thing where there's a miscommunication. And you have a quick conversation to try to rectify that, to make sure they're on the same page. And that doesn't mean that you've obviated the move as much as gained an understanding. So now we're all telling the same kind of story together. We understand the canon that's just happened. So yeah, check in. That's the short version of it. Have that quick conversation.
Yeah, and if you're a player, because we are addressing the players, and things get, from your perspective, pretty intense and nobody speaks up, at the end of a session, feel free to check in with everyone and say, hey, can we talk about what happened in play a little bit, and just use that as time to decompress.
And you don't have to X-card the moment if you're just trying to have a conversation. But if it gets intense for you to where you want to pull back, you can call a timeout. Say, hey, hold on a sec, guys. Just so I'm clear, like, this is where we're going, or is everybody cool with that? No, nobody. You're leaning in here, Joe. You seem intense. Are we cool? Oh yeah, we're cool. This is just such a good scene. Awesome. Bam, let's get back to it. And then you pick right back up and you go in. Now, one of the things that David also asked as a follow-up was, how can the MC help facilitate or encourage, if appropriate, the players to have their characters engage in hostile ways? Well, look at your mechanics, right? The MC's job is, you're there to jump forward with mechanics while the players are describing what they do. Players just talk. They talk about what they're going to try to accomplish. If you're running a game that has player versus player types of moves, strings, interference, cutting deals behind somebody's back, as the MC, jump forward. Hey, you know you can interfere with that move, right? Oh, hey, you know that you get XP when you go after this thing that they have, right? It's indirect. You're not saying, yo, I think you should go roll up on Brian's battle babe and take him out. Because you're the MC. You want a good story. You don't want to pit player characters against player characters. You just point out the moves. Hey, you kind of disclaim that decision making. But if you tell some other player, like, I think you should go after this player character's thing, I don't think that's a good approach, because that can put people on the defensive. It makes them feel like you're no longer that neutral party. You're no longer the MC that is supposed to be the master of ceremonies and the fan of everybody's player characters. You're choosing favorites, or at least it gives the appearance of it. So point PCs at other PCs, resources. Point PCs at other PCs personally, but do so by highlighting their moves, their options, and the rewards that they get within the game if they choose to pursue the mechanics.
Yeah, be a fan of the characters, basically.
Right, absolutely. But that's all MC talk. Anything else on this question from a player's perspective, Rach?
Oh, I did have one little MC thing. Just a final MC thought before we go. Don't bury MacGuffins or things your PCs would fight over in the hands of NPCs. I find personally MCing games that are very PvP heavy, that becomes more interesting if it's just directly player characters versus player characters. When you get NPCs stuck in the middle as sort of active participants on par with the player characters in a conflict, it becomes significantly much less interesting. So if you do have something that is a object of many PCs' desires, take it out of the hands of the NPCs and just put it out in the wild and see what happens. I'm sure you'll be delighted.
Yeah. Have one player just stumble into that really important thing that other player needs. Scarcity is a thing in a lot of PbtA games. Use that to your advantage. Nice. I like that one, Rach. Marc-Alexandre asks, what materials could the player use to easily organize the information about their character? PbtA abstracts a lot of things, but most moves from most playbooks are a case of specific over general, which means to memorize all the chosen playbook moves on top of the general moves and the special moves can be tough. Marc-Alexandre tend to keep around 3 sheets of paper in front of them at all times, more if they have access to subsystems abilities, like hacking in the Sprawl. It's a lot, right? Especially with the more recent generation of PbtA games where they have pages upon pages of basic moves and sub-moves, battle moves, road war moves. There's a lot of moves out there. And then if you have custom moves, that's a whole nother list. So, Rach, take a stab. What are some things that you do to try to make it easier for folks as a player to keep track of all the cool things that they can do?
The first step is it really depends on if this is an online game for me or if it's a face-to-face game. Mm-hmm. Online games, really easy to fix this problem. in the campaigns I've been part of, and both in running and playing, we use Google Docs. We take out the moves that are important to the characters. We put them in a character section of that Google Doc. And that way we have, and everyone has like a snapshot idea of what can each character do, where do their interests lie, what important gear they have, how much barter they have, what is your history like, your resources, that sort of thing. It's all in one place. And then we can all open up that Google Doc and then pray Google Docs doesn't crash or get laggy, which it sometimes does, increasingly more recently. But it's a good reference. It keeps everything clean. Even in those games, though, I personally like having my own little character sheet because I like taking notes. So I often just scratch ideas down in the margins. Rich, how do you keep things under control for a online game?
Well, for online games, I like to use Google Spreadsheets, and as an MC, I use character keepers where everyone's characters are all on the same spreadsheet. And I like playing in games that have character keepers. And so I will take the moves that are special and copy that into the character keeper, the move name, and then on a different cell I'll have the move detail. So I don't have a whole lot of different places to look. I can just look down the column or columns that make up my character. Really helpful. And side note, I also, in the character keeper I can look at from left to right the other player characters and their moves and their XP triggers. And I, as a player, can see, oh wow, they have this move. I think it would be cool if I could give them an opportunity to trigger that move. Or, hey, they get XP for doing this thing. I can give them an opportunity to do that thing. So it's multi-functional for not just knowing my moves, I can look at their moves. So that's the thing that really helps me as character keepers.
Yeah, there's no real advantage to keeping your move secret from the other players, to be honest.
No, not in PbtA games that I've played. I'm sure someone will come along and go, well, actually, let me push my glasses up my nose. And that's cool. If you've got a well, actually, share it with us. I'd be curious. I wonder if Undying, I haven't played Undying. I wonder if Undying is one of those. I don't know.
I'm not sure. I haven't played it either. I've talked about it a little bit, but never actually sat down to play it. So with face-to-face games, Rich, how do you keep all that paperwork under control?
Well, a couple of approaches. Meat Space, I noticed this thing at Origins where, so I'm a terrible cheater, guys, just so you know. I play in games with other MCs just to learn how they do stuff. I'll play in games with specific players that I heard are awesome so that I can crib notes on how they do things. And I was walking past the table, and I don't even think I saw the MC at the time, but I saw how the player had their character sheet and then a stack of the 2 pages of basic moves right underneath. So they had all of it. And then every player had that. I'm like, wow, okay, so everybody gets their own copy of the basic moves. To me, the basic moves has always been to laminate it, throw a couple copies in the middle of the table, and people grab it when they need it. But I saw people who had that like stacked up. They had their 3 sheets, and they would kind of shift them around. And it seemed really helpful to have all those really close at hand.
When I play Powered by the Apocalypse games at home, I always print out a copy of the basic moves for each person. They tend not to crowd the table as much as you'd think they would because not everyone has them open at once. Some people have them tucked away or maybe stacked underneath another one of their sheets. And even as the MC, though, I usually keep a copy of those basic moves in front of me just so I can keep an eye on those triggers. There's no real benefit, I feel, to memorizing them. I just like having a reference in front of me. In terms of when I play... my day job is in a pharmacy. We are not paperless in my pharmacy. I have to manage a lot of paper, and how I manage all that paper reflects on how I manage my personal workspace when I'm playing Powered by the Apocalypse games. I usually have a copy of my playbook. I have a copy of my basic moves. I have a notebook for me to make references and take notes. I was showing Rich before the game. I have this big 2-page spread of my debts list from our last one-on-one Urban Shadows campaign because it was that big. And it would just be unwieldy if it wasn't in a place. And having it in a notebook means that I could just stuff those character sheets in there if I need to clean up my workspace for whatever reason at the gaming table. It keeps everything in one place. If I need to go back and make a reference to, oh, what was the NPC we reached out to a couple of sessions ago? It's all there. Not everyone likes notebooks. That's just how I roll. It's not that different from having a Google Doc with everything quickly at hand.
The other method for Meat Space, I'm going to give credit to my wife and call it the Lane Bissett method. So I ran, as anyone's listened to me talk and gab on podcasts, I ran a very long Vampire the Masquerade Chronicle. It lasted for 7 years, which also was the extent of my collegiate career. Yes, I changed my major a lot. And my wife played the same character for all but 6 months of those 7 years. And she had a lot of stuff. And so what she would do is go, I'm also old, photocopy out of the books where she had grabbed different skills, disciplines, all that good stuff. Photocopy that out, cut out the photocopy, and then create a little collage. So she had a sheet where she had kind of glue sticked on all of the different disciplines, aka moves in PbtA parlance, onto a brand new sheet. And that way she didn't have to carry around 10 splat books. She just combined it all together into 1 or 2, or by the end of the game, 3 or 4 easy reference sheets. And she had everything well at hand.
Yeah, there's no law that says you have to use the documents as they're presented to you. I mean, some players find the design of sheets, just in terms of how they get unwieldy, to not work out well for them. So they design their own ways of keeping things in check and under control.
I remember Arnold Cassell used to say, if there isn't some variant of your character sheet out there in the world where someone's made a new version of your character sheet, your game isn't getting a whole lot of play. I always thought that was a neat little bon mot that he had about RPGs. He also happened to love to make character sheets, so I think he had a personal investment in that thought process.
Well, at one point when I was new in the gaming community and when I was still doing graphic design work, I remember asking my spouse, Rob, how much do you think people would pay me to do character sheets? And he looked at me and said, based on what I've seen online, probably not a lot.
I don't know. Now that drive-through RPG is a thing, you should reevaluate.
It could be my retirement fund.
There's an entire cottage industry of Dungeon World character sheet stuff.
Dungeon World is its own cottage industry at this point.
It's true. It's true.
So our final set of questions, this is the lightning round.
Yeah, we're stealing this from the Fear of a Black Dragon podcast.
These come from Marshall Miller, who asked us a bunch of little questions that don't think there's a lot for us to discuss in depth, but we can get a few good ideas out over each of these.
Let's do it.
Okay, what are the best PbtA games for kids?
So not many. Not only are a bunch of PbtA games thematically not appropriate for kids, hashtag sex moves. Also, the games ask for you to play a character and make decisions about the world around you in a collaborative fashion that can be a real challenge for kids in my experience. That said, there are a few that work pretty great. The top 3 PbtA games for kids, in my opinion, are The Warren. Yes, rabbits die, but you can veil that. You'd be surprised how resilient kids can be. Dungeon World. Oh my gosh, the 11-year-old kids and now 12-year-old kids looking over moves and building their characters. Dungeon World is a treat because really you just play your character. Most of the moves are right there. They're very clear and they don't ask you to step outside of the skin of your character a significant amount. And a game that you mentioned earlier, Apillion, is really great for kids. Now, there's things that can be applicable for adults, but just like you said, it was play tested with kids in mind, and it works just great.
Yeah, Apillion, I think, is like a really great starting point for bringing kids into the Powered by the Apocalypse community, because when you start the game, you're a clutch of baby dragons who are trying to figure out the world. The game, when it gets into sort of the later stages, starts exploring, what is the truth between good and evil? Is there really a difference? Is the shadow something that exists outside of us? Is it a reflection of something that inhabits the inside? Those would be great ideas for an adult campaign. They don't necessarily have to come up in a child-focused campaign. I mean, a child-focused campaign could be we go out and discover Draconia and find out all these neat things and chronologue them and catalog them. And the game doesn't really have to go beyond that.
All right, what's next?
What are the best PbtA games for... Hey, so what does PBF mean, Rich?
It's play by forum, also play by post. So it's games online in a primarily written manner.
Oh, yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with this, unfortunately. I'm tapping out. Rich, go ahead.
I do! Also, see Marshall Miller's episode about the Warren. See, look at this. Marshall Miller asking about the best games for play by forum when he's talked a little bit about PbtA and play by forum. The guy has a niche, and boy, he and I share it. So here are my thoughts on the best PbtA games for play by forum or play by post. Monster Hearts gets tons of play-by-post play on Tavern Keeper and other sites. Check out the Monster Hearts Google Plus community. You should be able to find some folks there. I've even seen there are a few Discords where there's a lot of healthy conversation about designing skins and starting up new play-by-post of Monster Hearts and other PbtA games. With a group of players, Apocalypse World is an amazing play-by-forum game because you can easily break folks up into solo or duo scenes to account for asynchronous play. And that can be a real killer for running a play-by-forum game of a more conventional style, all the party moves together style of game, because if you've got everybody has to go in a particular order or they have initiatives and you've got to wait for everybody's scene, it really slows down play. But with these games in PbtA where it's more abstractive, you got one move that could resolve the significant portion of an entire combat or completely change the scenario, play by post is a great medium for play. Dungeon World, Star Wars World, which is a PbtA hack for Star Wars play, surprise, surprise, and Urban Shadows are also very fun for play by post. And I've found Masks to be good, but it can be a bit challenging because the assumed play style of Masks is, hey, we're all together, because there are all these team moves. So it can be a little bit more work to break folks up. So make sure that you have a group that can post relatively frequently around each other. Maybe not at the same time per day, but just with the same rate of posts per day or per week. Otherwise, you can gum up the works a little bit. That said, Masks is a really easy game to recruit for because who doesn't want to hop on Pinterest and find cool superhero pictures?
Right? So my takeaway is you're looking for a game that could possibly focus its lens on one or two players for when you have people dropping in and out of play due to real life commitments. And then sometimes if you have a group of people who can all post roughly at the same time at the same frequency, you can expand out into games that have more party focus.
Absolutely. That's great. What's next?
What's the best PbtA game for one player and one MC? Ooh, I have opinions here.
Oh, do it. Opinionate.
Okay, so it's really going to depend on the type of story you want to play. There are some games with mechanics that don't really work in a one-on-one game.
Mm-hmm.
Bluebeard's Bride, for example, is a Powered by the Apocalypse game where you're really looking for that tension between the different players, and the groundskeeper is mostly there to push that conflict along. You're not going to get that much out of a solo game there. With other games that are less focused on that player versus player aspect, you got a bit of wiggle room. You're really going to have to consider the playbook and the type of story that you want to go with. You want to consider playbooks that will drive the story forward and action forward rather than playbooks that are more completely in a support role. You can play support-ish characters in a one-on-one game, but you really need to have some inertia to keep going. Expect that there will be a lot of NPCs because they need to fill the role that the PCs would normally inhabit. They're going to be your contacts, your interesting plot conveniences, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And something to consider when you're picking your playbooks is, especially if you have sex or intimacy moves, you want to have a look and make sure that that move is not intended to trigger only on PCs. There's a couple that operate like this. For example, I think the Angel in Apocalypse World does things specifically with history. That's not really going to matter that much if you're only playing with NPCs.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote here notes. I have a lot of grievances with the wizard intimacy move in Urban Shadows, which I've mentioned on other episodes of this podcast. It came up again because in my solo Urban Shadows campaign, I ascended into wizardhood recently.
Ooh, congrats.
The intimacy move there is -1 ongoing to running away. In our recent campaign, we came back and started a session and we found an NPC note that said, why does it say this aware cannot escape? This aware being an NPC. And we had to sit there for a couple minutes and realize, oh, we had a moment of emotional intimacy. And that was what that was all about. It didn't really come up in play at all. There are much more interesting intimacy moves in that game. You don't always have to be married to the intimacy move that your playbook comes with, obviously. So if you're playing a solo game and you really want to play the wizard, but you really want something that makes sense, just go steal from another playbook. No one's going to care. It's a solo game. The RPG police are not going to chase you down.
Exactly.
Which games, Rich, do you feel work the best specifically?
Well, before I talk about specific games, one thing that I want to highlight that I have found in one-on-one play is that often PbtA games are created with a group in mind. And so take a look at the help and interfere moves, like anything teamwork related, because in a one-on-one game, those don't exist. And so you should look at that with mind of, okay, do I want to custom move in some kind of mechanic to give a resource to my one player to boost their rolls when it is narratively significant or makes sense that they would have some kind of teamwork? Or if you don't want to do a full-on custom move and give them that resource, you can do something along the lines of, I'm going to give you a +1 for it because Joe's girl's here with you helping you try to knock down that door, or Joe's girl will pick up the slack for you to make sure that you pull that off. So that's one thing I wanted to kind of highlight. I've actually used a bond mechanic similar to what you find in Sagas of the Icelanders, where you have a certain number of boosts to roll based off of bonds that you have with different characters, and that could be with NPCs. I've used that for Apocalypse World in the past for a one-on-one game, so look to that.
Super great idea there.
Thank you. So what are good games for one-on-one? Urban Shadows, man. I think I prefer it one-on-one because Urban Shadows with a group, every character creates their own supporting cast, and they're constantly generating new members of the city with factions and the like. When you just have one player character, it becomes a lot more manageable. I'd rather run Urban Shadows on a one-on-one style. Dungeon World's another game, really solid for one-on-one play. So those would be the two I most recommend. There are other things that you can make work. There's some that are less good for one-on-one. But if you collaborate with your player, you can do just about anything, right? Just write a few mechanics and a few custom moves.
Yeah, just play around with it. Play to find out what happens. And
nice.
Aha! I'm quick on the draw there. But just play around with it and see what works and what doesn't. If it's not a great fit, you can always shuffle into another system.
Exactly.
One last thing I will point out, from my experience, I don't know if you've felt the same with your experience, Rich, is I find solo Powered by the Apocalypse games run fast.
Oh, yeah.
In that you could tell a very deep, complicated session in about 1 to 2 hours rather than going for that whole 4 hours. That whole 4 hours could be incredibly draining.
Very good note. Oh my goodness, you can be so worn after 1 hour of just one-on-one play. Heck, I remember when Judd was running Sorcerer, again, not a PbtA game, running Sorcerer for me in 15 to 20 minute increments, and oh my gosh, like, it just wore me out. So yeah, be advised. There's a lot you can get through.
Yeah, and as a player, I've never felt unsatisfied even with a short game if it's solo. I mean, you're on screen all the time. It's great.
That's right. You can't hog the spotlight if it's only on you.
And the last question from Marshall is, what is the best PbtA game for a large group? 8+ is the example he cited. Why? Why would you do that? Why? That's so sad. Why? Was the sign-up system at the convention broken? How did this occur?
Hey, Marshall, I think it's awesome you have that many friends, but really, why?
Legit aside, not powered by the apocalypse, there was a time at Queen City Conquest where the registration system broke in a weird way, and my spouse Rob had a Swords Without Master game that had like 7 players.
Oh my.
And that is how Sunday Morning Swords became multi-table at that convention, is because they came to me and said, can you run a second table?
There you go.
But okay, going back to the question though, you have a large group through fate and circumstances. We will not speculate as to how this happened. What would you run, Rich?
So, if you can't recruit someone to also MC and split the table, and that's not an option, you could look to games that have very clearly delineated moves and utilize that game with the idea that people may have side scenes. Monster Hearts is a possibility. It is an intense game, but Avery, she's done an amazing job of writing a game that the moves trigger when they trigger. To do it, you do it. And so you could conceivably have 2 characters that go play 7 minutes in heaven and send those 2 players away from the table and deal with 6 players and shuffle things in and out and keep things on the fly. I mean, you could do a big rager that happens sometimes in high school movies. I never got to go to a big rager when I was in high school.
I was never invited.
Yeah, I don't know if they actually happened. But in the movies, that happens all the time. And a Monster Hearts game and a big rager party for a one-shot with 8 players would be crazy hectic, but maybe crazy fun.
I would go with something that was less interplayer focused, like go with Dungeon World.
Ooh.
Which is going to run fairly clean. I've seen people manage fantasy D&D OSR games on a fairly large scale. You're going to have a lot of downtime in between shifting the focus around, but I think that's a little bit more baked into that subgenre of role-playing games. It might match up with people's expectations, but my first reaction would be try to go find a second MC and break the table into 2.
Yeah, and then we're talking to the players, so really you could just recruit someone else to also run the game, and then you can go off with 3 other players and you're done, right? That's what you can do.
Pretty much. Have you ever been in a game that big?
I've been in a couple of 5-player PbtA games, and I think, if I remember correctly, I ran a Spirit of 77 game with 6 players at Origins last year in a 2-hour slot, and I felt like I had just run a 5K.
Wow. One of my earliest Apocalypse World games was this very strange drop-in campaign where they didn't moderate how many people signed up, and I'm pretty sure we had 10 people show up one day.
Wow.
And I did not stick around very long. When I'm running, I find that things do okay up to 5 players, but as soon as I get a 6-player in, things get a little shaky, and I feel very self-conscious that people aren't getting the screen time they should be getting.
Yeah, I mean, you can make it happen, but it's exactly like you said. You're going to end up, some people are not going to get enough screen time, and it could lead to hurt feelings. So take care, dear friends. If you have 8 people at your table, take care.
Make them all play Cheat Your Own Adventure instead.
All right. Well, Rach, thank you for getting these questions from our wonderful listeners and setting this up. It's been really fun tackling some player-oriented questions on playing these games we love.
Yeah, and thanks to the community for giving these awesome questions for us to ask. I swear we are going to do an emceeing one of these eventually, so keep your eyes open for when that post goes up.
Plus One Forward is a production of the Gauntlet community, Richard Rogers and Rach Shelkey. You can find us at gauntlet-rpg.com or follow us on Twitter at @+1FWD. If you would like to support our show, visit our Patreon site at patreon.com/gauntlet. The games mentioned on this show use the Apocalypse engine, which is a creation of Vincent and Magay Baker. The music for Plus One Forward is from the Savage Aural Hotbed CD Gomi Daiko. The songs used are Gomi Daiko, Metal Version, and Hammer of Bill. You can find more amazing tunes by Savage Aural Hotbed on their website, www.savageauralhotbed.com.